Hello my dear friends, how are you? Hope you're having a lovely day. Today I would like to make a video about Thomas Paine and his famous pamphlet, Common Sense, possibly the most influential pamphlet in the history of the world. I know that's a hard one, isn't it? But I don't know what else is going to match it, right? This is the pamphlet which essentially kicked off the Revolutionary War in America. It was published in January 1776. Now, of course, in response, straight away, you'll say, well, hang on a minute, Brutus. Hang on a minute. The revolution had already started by then. Yes, it had. But it was more of a civil war, and it was more of a case of English people fighting against the English king, but they didn't want to separate entirely from England and from the British Empire. They were still loyal to England, and they still considered themselves to be Englishmen, and they still considered America to be an English colony. What they wanted is an end to the tariffs and so on and so forth, and they wanted a reconciliation, and they were upset about the heavy-handedness of English troops in Boston and so on and so forth. It was Thomas Paine, in Common Sense, who convinced them that reconciliation will not be possible and that America should go its own way. And of course there were other people before this who had this view, but they were on the outside. They were radicals. Benjamin Franklin was one of them. But it was Thomas Paine that brought this point of view to the forefront. And of course later on in 1776 you have the Declaration of Independence, and then that's it. You have the Revolutionary War, and eventually they get their independence, and you know the rest of the story, right? Now the United States of America is the most powerful nation in the world, and it's taken the British Empire from us. It's swallowed it whole, and it rules the world, and so on and so forth. And all of that, a lot of that can be traced back to Thomas Paine and Common Sense, this revolutionary transformative pamphlet which sold hundreds of thousands of copies and was read aloud back in those days. You got to remember, back in those days not everybody could read. They had a thing where a guy would go to like a tavern or whatever, and he'd stand up and he'd read the thing aloud and people would listen. It was like, well, of course they didn't have TV, right? They didn't have TV, they didn't have smartphones, and so to sit and listen to somebody else read was kind of a pleasure. It was a thing. Obviously, we don't do that anymore, right? Kind of interesting. It'd be interesting to see people bring that kind of habit back. But just to clarify, I took a few notes on just some of the incidents leading up to the war. So obviously, in 1763, you have the Treaty of Paris, which ended the 7 Years' War. This was Winston Churchill actually called the 7 Years' War the First World War. And it's a funny war because apparently it didn't actually last for 7 years. But essentially it was England versus France. Who's going to rule the world? Who's going to dominate? Who's going to be in charge? England versus France. We won. And then obviously the struggle continued for some time. And you had the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and then Napoleon. And then we finally really beat Napoleon. And then we really dominated. But there was this ongoing struggle between England and our old enemy, the French. So 1763, this kicked off. 7 Year War. We had the Treaty of Paris, and the Americans who were involved in this war weren't really happy with the Treaty of Paris because as part of that treaty, they were prevented from moving further west. They were prevented from moving west of the Appalachian Mountains, and land was given to various different Native American groups and so on and so forth. Of course, at that time, before the Louisiana Purchase, which of course happened when Napoleon was in charge. So Napoleon sold a huge chunk of North America to the colonies. That was known as the Louisiana Purchase. So before that happened, there was a huge chunk of America that was owned by France. Right, and New Orleans was kind of like the capital of that. I just watched a video recently, actually, talking about New Orleans. the whole city is just sinking. Okay, so New Orleans is a very important city because it's on the Mississippi Delta. And, people like to say, by the way, like, there's obviously ethno-nationalists, they're very, very strong in their opinion, like, it's, there's no such thing as magic soil, right? And, but they're, and, it's the blood, it's not the soil. And obviously I'm an ethno-nationalist, so I also believe this. But at the same time, there are certain countries in the world that do have brilliant geographical advantages, and some countries that just don't, and that's just a fact, right? If you live in the Sahara Desert, you've got a geographical disadvantage, right? So, and actually Africa as a whole, despite the fact that you can grow all kinds of food there, and yes, it's got natural resources, and you can grow food quite easily, it does have huge problems in that you don't have anything like the Mississippi in Africa. You don't have a river which just flows all the way into the heart of Africa and then spreads out and branches out. You don't have that. America has it with the Mississippi. The Chinese, they've got it with I think it's the Yangtze River, isn't it, in China? Obviously in Europe, we've got the Danube, we've got the Rhine, we've got the Volga. Obviously India's got the Ganga and various other rivers. But in Africa, Africa has a very strange geography in which it's like the whole of first of all, they don't have very many good harbours, good natural harbours around even though you have a huge coast, you don't have very many very good natural harbours. But also, it's like the centre of the whole of Africa is just slightly raised up, and the whole continent is surrounded by this. It's just on a slightly lower level, and so although Africa has rivers, I know I'm doing a terrible job of explaining the geography here, but although Africa has rivers, they all have to dip down a lot to get to the ocean, and so it's rocky and there's waterfalls, and it just makes it inaccessible for boats. So I'm sorry, but there is such a thing as magic soil to a certain extent, and America's got magic soil, and that magic soil is the Mississippi River, one of the greatest river systems in the world, which assists them with transportation and so on and so forth. And the French recognise this, and so they put a city on, at the mouth of the river, and that city's called New Orleans, which is currently now sinking because it's on the delta, so it's on the mud, and so it's just sinking. And I don't know what their solution to that is. I mean, I would just knock the whole thing down. But anyway, the point, my dear friends, is that you had the Treaty of Paris, and the Americans weren't happy because they wanted to move into the French territory. We weren't letting them do so. We gave a whole bunch of territory to the Native American Indians. So they weren't happy about that. And then in 1765, a Stamp Act was passed, no taxation without representation. This slogan appeared there. The Sons of Liberty formed at this time. And that ended up getting repealed. But then in 1773, a new act was passed, which was the Tea Act, which gave a monopoly to the British East India Company. And this led to the famous Boston Tea Party, in which, famously, the Irish, they got on the boats, they threw the tea into the ocean, right? So, infamous international corporations triggers revolution, I suppose. And then in 1774, you have the First Continental Congress. And then we, the Brits, we started getting angry, started putting troops in there, and you have the battles of Lexington and Concord, and you have the famous Paul Revere, riding on his horse saying a shot was heard around the world, which leads to the Second Continental Congress, the appointing of George Washington. But all this happened in 1775, and they were not yet quite fixed in their opinion of actually separating themselves from Britain and from the British Empire. This was simply a rebellion. They wanted, I guess, no taxation without representation. They wanted reconciliation. They wanted a better deal, basically. It was Thomas Paine who pushed them over the edge with his pamphlet, Common Sense. And it's not just me saying this. George Washington has said this, and King George himself has said this. There was a definite change in opinion when people read this essay. So, what does he say? Well, in the book, first of all, he begins with the difference between society and government, which I thought was actually quite good. Obviously, when he's talking about society, he's basically talking about state of nature, but he doesn't use that term. So, of course, as you know, this is the Enlightenment, so it's all coming from John Locke, and it's all, Hobbes and John Locke, and the idea that you have a state of nature, man lives in a state of nature, everything's nasty, brutish, and short, it's difficult, there's a struggle, and so people create a social contract, and they agree to accept a government. Either with Hobbes, that would be a king. With Locke, that would be some kind of democratic government. So this is the driving opinion behind the Enlightenment. This is the thing that's being questioned now. I mean, there's another thing, like, I got somebody complaining to me the other day saying, "Oh, you keep talking about the same stuff." Well, I'm going through liberalism, and there's a reason I'm going through it, because this our world is founded on these concepts, which is why it upsets me when people like Sargon of Akkad and Connor Tomlinson think it's a very good idea to just tear up liberalism and throw it away. This is foolish. If you do this, you are tearing away the political foundation on which our nation rests, both England and America and the Anglosphere as a whole. Everything's resting on the idea of the social contract. That is the political idea that undermines everything, underlies everything. So, do you really just want to throw that in the bin? And then these two guys, they just sit there and they say, "Well, we need something else." And it's like, well, what else? What's your proposal? And they don't have a proposal. I mean, this is just childish. This is absurd. And I was actually listening to another book, actually. I listen to audiobooks when I'm at work. What's his name? Hayek, the Road to Serfdom. And he, right in the middle of this book was written in the middle of the Second World War, I think. And he's just talking about, it's a libertarian book, and he's basically just saying, we don't want to adopt these socialist ideas. It's going to lead to slavery, right? And he's making the point that for some reason in America, the word liberal has been stolen by the left wing. They've taken this word from us. And, now a liberal is apparently a socialist. But whereas originally socialists and liberals were two different things. And everybody's followed along with this. The right-wing media has followed along with this. And now it's a constant swear word on the internet. Oh, you're a liberal. Whereas classical liberalism was completely different to what people call liberalism now. It's a completely different concept. So all the left has done is they've gone into, basically because they're incredibly subversive and they're quite intelligent in their subversiveness, they thought, what should we do? We understand that the Americans are resistant to concepts of socialism and Marxism. So what we'll do is we'll go into their ideology. What's the ideology that America's built on? It's Thomas Paine, it's common sense, it's liberalism, it's classical liberalism. So, what should we do? Let's adopt their word and then twist it and turn it into something else. And then turn the people of America against that word. And by doing so, we'll turn them against America, and we'll get the American people themselves to rip up their own foundations, which is exactly what they're doing, and which is exactly what Sargon of Akkad and Connor Tomlinson are going along with in their infinite wisdom. They're like, yay, let's tear it down. Well, it's stupid. It's dumb. And they'll say, oh, but it's connected to the blank slate theory of mind. It's not connected to the blank slate theory of mind. I know that John Locke had these ideas, but classical liberalism is a political ideology, and the blank slate theory of mind is an epistemological ideology, and they're two different things, and they're not necessarily connected at all. Liberalism is built on the idea that you're treated equally before the law. Liberalism is built on the idea that the aristocracy should be treated in the same way that the peasants are treated, essentially. That's the idea. It's built on equality before the law. It's not built on the idea that everybody's the same, or everybody has the same IQ, or that men and women are the same, and etc., etc., etc. And it's proved this in its history, because we have the Trail of Tears, in which Jackson kicked all the Indians out. I mean, the whole of America is built on a race war, for Christ's sake. It's built on a race war against the Native American Indians. You also have Australia with its white-only immigration policy, and you have laws against miscegenation, and etc., etc., etc. So liberalism, classical liberalism, has no problem at all with living side by side with extreme racism. And it is a mistake to say that if you are a liberal, then you have to believe in the blank slate theory of mind. This is just silly. But anyway, I'm just saying this. I'm pointing all of this out again. I'm repeating myself again, because here we have Thomas Paine, common sense. How does he start? He starts with the state of nature. He doesn't actually use the term state of nature. He uses the term society. I actually think that this introduction to his essay is quite good, so I'll read it to you. Right, here we go. Some writers have so confounded society with government as to leave little or no distinction between them, whereas they are not only different, but have different origins. Society is produced by our wants, and government by our wickedness. The former promotes our happiness positively, by uniting our affections, the latter negatively, by restraining our vices. The one encourages intercourse, the other creates distinctions. The first is a patron, or patron, the last a punisher. Society in every state is a blessing, but government, even if its best state, is but a necessary evil. In its worst state, an intolerable one. For when we suffer, or are exposed to the same miseries by a government which we might expect in a country without government, our calamities is heightened by reflecting that we furnish the means by which we suffer. Government, like dress, is the badge of lost innocence. The palaces of kings are built on the ruins of the bowers of paradise. For were the impulses of conscience clear, uniform, and irresistibly obeyed, man would need no other lawgiver. But that not being the case, he finds it necessary to surrender up a part of his property to furnish means for the protection of the rest. And this he is induced to do by the same prudence which in every other case advises him out of two evils to choose the least. Wherefore, security being the true design and end of government, it unanswerably follows that whatever form thereof appears most likely to ensure it to us with the least expense and greatest benefit is preferable to all others. So, yeah, security, foundation of government. Very nice introduction. People are not safe. Morality is not enough to hold people together, essentially, is the argument that he's saying. And he goes on to make the argument that people need each other. You can't just live by yourself in a cabin in the woods, like Walden. Walden, the great novel by Henry David Thoreau. By the way, just to go on a complete tangent, do you know I've only just noticed this? I can't believe I've only just noticed the beauty of triple-barreled names. To me, it always seemed to be something inconvenient. Like, why do I have to remember 3 names instead of just 2? But, of course, it comes from the Romans, doesn't it? They all had triple-barrel names. And it's just like, oh, once I can see the connection with Rome, it's just like, now it seems like something beautiful. Because I also have a middle name, and I never use it, and I never tell it to people. But now I started telling people my middle name, because it's just like, well, yes, I'm a Roman. Of course I've got 3 names. Of course. So anyway, it's not Henry Thoreau, it's Henry David Thoreau. I mean, what's Donald Trump's middle name? Hang on a second. Yeah, I just looked it up. It's Donald John Trump. So, just to go on a little tangent, I'm going on one tangent, I'm going on another tangent. But anyway, this, I think perhaps this is part of the deconstruction of Western civilization, that we've lost the triple-barreled names, because we've lost Mr. and Mrs. Nobody says Mr. Trump anymore, right? Everything's all, you've got to be informal, you've got to use the first name. Hey, Donald, you know. And we've lost triple-barrel names. Nobody uses them anymore. And I think that's a problem. But anyway, Henry David Thoreau, the author of Walden. And what is Walden? Walden is a novel which expresses American transcendentalism. And American transcendentalism is one of the primary American philosophies. Go to the Wikipedia and look up what is American philosophy, and it will tell you that you have transcendentalism and you have pragmatism. Well, I don't really know what kind of philosophy pragmatism is. It just means do whatever's practical, I suppose. I mean, I guess you've also got transhumanism. I would argue is a true American philosophy. And I would argue that a large part of America's input to the culture of the world is science fiction, and it's superhero science fiction. And superhero science fiction is by its very nature transhumanist. But nonetheless, in more classical terms, transcendentalism is recognized to be the philosophy of America, right? And what is that all about? Well, it's all about communing with nature. It's all about the idea that civilization is bad and civilization is corrupting. And by going back to nature, you can commune with nature and you can experience the divine by communing with nature, by living in a cabin in the woods, like in Walden. Henry David Thoreau, he lived in this cabin for, I think, 2 years and 2 months and 2 days. And he experienced the ebb and flow of the seasons and the changes, and he came to know himself. So this is an old story, by the way, of course. People in India have been doing this for thousands of years. The Chinese have been doing this, particularly the Taoists, just go be a hermit in the forest, right? But nonetheless, it's an integral part of American culture. It's kind of like understood. It's there. And it's right here in common sense. It's the idea that civilization is bad. Civilization is bad. Civilization is a corrupting force. We're better off without it. Right? I just want to be left alone. That's the idea. That's the driving force behind America. You've got to understand. Paine goes on to talk about this later on. You've got to understand, America is filled with people who have fled Europe. Right? Later on in the essay, Thomas Paine points out, he's very good at making this caricature of Europe as this kind of monster. Because people are making it the argument, England is our mother, Europe is the homeland, it's the motherland. And Thomas Paine's like, no, look what they've done to their children, right? The monsters. I mean, first of all, they attacked, at this time, the fighting had already begun and atrocities had been committed. But also he makes the point that America is full of refugees from Europe. They've been fleeing religious persecution. America is the land of the free. Right? So it's right here in common sense. And the type of people that had moved to America had taken those values and those kind of opinions and those desires with them. They're the type of people that wanted to run away. They wanted to get away from it all and make a fresh start for themselves. And they wanted freedom, and they found it in America. And so they're running from civilization in a way. They're running to the wilderness. So yeah, civilization is bad. So, I've seen people making fun of Rousseau, right? Who of course wrote The Social Contract. And, he was an advocate for direct democracy. I am an advocate for direct democracy. I think the American project is incomplete. I think none of the problems that we are having today would be happening if we had referendums on everything. I think Switzerland is the true conclusion of the Enlightenment, and it is the best form of government in the world. That's my opinion. Everybody has the right to bear arms, very low level of crime, and people are satisfied with the government because they get to vote on everything. I'm not saying it's perfect, because obviously they mandated the vaccines. That was a bit of a mistake. But it is a small landlocked country, and it's doing the best it can. I mean, if they had referendums in America, I believe in the instinct of the mob. I guess, do you know what? I think, the more I talk about these ideas, the more I start to think, I think there's a huge difference between, really kind of depends on what your view on human nature is. Hobbes had a very bad view of human nature. He just thought people are bad. And so he thought, well, we've got to have a king, and it doesn't matter if it's a tyrant, because it's better than just letting people, right? It's better than just letting people just live, because they'll just kill each other, because people are just animals. People are awful, right? So he didn't trust people at all. Whereas Rousseau had more of a... Obviously, Rousseau was one of the people that promoted this idea of the noble savage, right? And of course, the idea of the noble savage is foolish, because you can see in Papua New Guinea, they're eating their children, right? And the Africans in Africa, they've got low IQ. They kill each other, they rape each other, they murder. So the idea of the idea of the noble savage is flawed, or at least it's flawed when it's applied to other ethnicities. But for white people, for European people, I think the idea of the noble savage, or I think the idea of white people just living alone by themselves in nature, or in America, in a land, I think it works. And because you get a group of high IQ white people, and they're going to make a nice civilization, and they don't need a tyrannical government to rule over them, to tell them what to do. Because they're good people, and they go to church, and they believe in God, and they believe in morality, and they're not super violent, and they're not crazy, and they're decent people, and they're going to get along with each other. So the idea of the noble savage, when it's used to promote strange ethnicities from all around the world, it's flawed. But the idea that man is innately good, and man, when left to his own devices, will be good, it works. Or at least it works for white people. I don't know if it works for everybody else. Perhaps the Africans need a dictator. They need a king. Perhaps the Chinese need to live in a tyrannical Chinese empire. They need to be told what to do. Otherwise, they just start eating dogs. I mean, I don't know. But I think for white people, they can pretty much be left alone, and they'll get on with things, and they'll be okay. So what I'm trying to say is that, it really depends on your view of human nature. If you think people are bad, then you're going to want a tyrant. But if you think people are good, then maybe you don't need a tyrant. Then maybe you'll be more inclined towards democracy, and you'll be more inclined towards giving people their own say. And as I was saying, I think Switzerland is the ultimate conclusion of that, because they have referendums. And my opinion is that, people criticize the mob, but you got to understand, what do people want? People want to have sex, and what is the product of sex? It's children, and children means family, right? So mankind's desires will naturally lead to the production of children, which will lead to family values, and family values is traditionalism. And no man wants his daughter to be a whore, and no man wants his son to be a homosexual, and no man wants his children to be murdered by some crazy immigrant, right? And so human nature flows naturally towards family values, and family values is conservative, and it is traditionalist, and it is good. It is what is good. in nature if you follow the philosophy of vitalism through. Because family values means producing children. And so it means you are fertile. And it means your DNA is being passed on to the next generation. Right? There's a whole bunch of vitalist nonsense on the internet about, guys with big muscles being barbarians. And it's like, well, do you have any children? Do you have any children? Genghis Khan had lots of children. Right? I just saw a post on the internet. Somebody was laughing at, what's that guy called? Is it Chris Williamson? Anyway, can't bother to look it up. But that famous internet influencer, and she was just saying they're like the beautiful ones, in the mouse utopia or the mouse dystopia. The famous experiment. They get all the mice. They put them in a containment area. They give them enough food to eat, enough water to drink, and then they just have a population explosion. And then they all go crazy and they start eating each other, and it gets really weird. And a group of the mice kind of separate themselves, and they just spend all their time grooming themselves and making themselves look beautiful. They're the beautiful ones. Well, we have this today, don't we? We have this today with guys. They go to the gym, they're jacked, they got a nice haircut, they've got great teeth. They don't want to have any children. They're optimizing. They're optimizing, bro. I'm going to optimize. They're optimizing their sleep patterns. They're fully hydrated. They're following the latest fashions. They've got the latest iPhone. They're going on a holiday to Ibiza. They're getting all their connections on Tinder, right? But are they having children? No. They are the beautiful ones, right? So real vitalism means the production of children. And as I say, that leads to family values. Family values is conservative. And so what I'm saying is, if you give people direct democracy, like what I want in this country is, I just simply want the ability to say no to the government. I don't think it's necessarily a good idea for people to be proposing laws, but I do think that any act of parliament should be passed on to the people of the country so we can say yes or no to it. And that would prevent some kind of crazy government being elected, which just goes ahead and does whatever the hell it wants, which is obviously what the Labour government's doing right now, right? And once you get this idea in your head, it's hard to shake the idea, because now every time you look at the news and you see, well, the government's done something crazy, you just think to yourself, well, why don't I get a vote on this? Right? So that would be my major critique of American democracy. But nonetheless, there is a connection here between Rousseau and Thomas Paine, in that they both kind of idolize living with nature, living as close to nature as you can, and living in a society. And that society is good and it's upheld by moral virtue, and government is a necessary evil, essentially. Government is a necessary evil. And I feel it. This appeals to my soul. I mean, there's a lot of people out there, and they're really, really drawn to Rome and Adolf Hitler and the armies and the kind of like the magnificence of it all. And I guess that's kind of appealing in a way. I mean, I can see that, I suppose. But I'm also just kind of drawn to the cabin in the woods. I think that's just more, I just want to be a farmer somewhere with my little piece of land, and I just want the government to leave me alone. So I guess the soul is pulling the European man in two different directions. But I think when our country was at its best in the late Victorian era and in the Edwardian period, we were essentially following this idea of very, very limited government. I mean, there's that famous quotation that before the First World War, the average Englishman would never even encounter the government. You never bump into the government. It would never be involved in your personal affairs. You might meet the policeman in the streets, or maybe the postman or whatever, but the government was not an intrusive thing. Now the government is very, 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 very intrusive. And I think this is awful. So, I mean, this is why I'm a liberal. Or I'm a libertarian. I mean, I'm going to start calling myself a libertarian. I think the libertarians just call themselves libertarians because obviously the liberals stole the word liberalism, didn't they? So I have to kind of rephrase. It's just a bunch of jiggling, wiggling nonsense, isn't it? At the end of the day, it's all just isms and ists. It annoys me that this is the level of dialect that we have to engage in, because people don't talk about policies; they talk about isms and ists, and it's like there's a fog over everybody's mind where people are just waving flags, and they're like, "I'm in this group over here, and you're in that group over there, and I'm good and you're bad." And it's like, well, what do you actually believe in? What policies do you believe in? Right? Don't tell me your ideology. It's so boring. The whole conflict of ideologies is kind of boring. I'd rather talk about the nuts and bolts of the thing instead. But anyway, so Thomas Paine goes on. He advocates for a simple government. He says that the Constitution of England is too complex. You can't find the problem. I found this to be hilarious because it's very true. I mean, we do have an organic constitution, which is kind of good, but at the same time, yeah, there's too many laws. There's too many laws. Nobody knows what the law is, and we obviously live in a form of technocracy, and nobody understands how the law works. And so, for rich people who can understand the law, they can avoid all kinds of things. They can get away with all kinds of stuff. And for ordinary good people who don't understand the law, they always end up getting screwed over by it because they don't understand all the tricks. And the get out clauses and the loops and so on and so forth. So yeah, the law's too complex. It's too convoluted. I agree with Paine on that. He makes the point that the king is the real ruler of England and it's his most powerful part. So he's kind of like disagreeing with Montesquieu here. Obviously, Montesquieu talked about the separation of powers. Paine's kind of like throwing that out the window and saying, look, the most powerful part will rule. And what's the most powerful part in England? Well, it's the king. Well, nowadays you could say that's false. And I guess practically that's true. I mean, Parliament is sovereign now. But that's only because the king doesn't flex his muscles. The king has incredible soft power. And if he was to use that soft power for the good of England and for the good of the English people would follow him. And he could push Parliament to the side if he wanted to. So, there's that. But, I mean, he's got a point. He says that the kings make wars. He bashes the idea of hereditary succession. He says this does not protect a nation from civil war. In fact, it plunges the country into civil war again and again and again as the children try to inherit the throne and they kill each other. He talks about America's position in the world. He says that America is big, it's powerful. He places a lot of emphasis on the historical importance of this moment and how that the American people need to grasp history. And he talks about the continent of America. He makes the point, how can this continent, this vast continent full of wealth, be controlled by this small island over there? Which, again, is a good point. I'm not too upset about losing the British Empire. I think, might is right. America is bigger than us. America is stronger than us. It's got more people. It's got more resources. That's just the way it is. No point crying over spilled milk. They rule the world now. If they want to blow up Iran, that's their problem. I just don't want to get involved in it. I think England should be in retirement from now on. We did our bit. We conquered the world. Now we're going to let America rule, and we'll just sit here and we'll play golf or whatever, cricket. I don't play golf and I don't play cricket, but whatever. You get the idea. He says some people are saying that England nurtured America. Well, he says it's time to grow up. So again, you have the father-son analogy here. England is the fatherland. By the way, this is my plan with America. This is what we should be exploiting. We need to have an English lobby, and we need to push aside the Israeli lobby. I don't want to scrap the BBC. A lot of people want to scrap it. I think that's a terrible mistake. We should keep the BBC, right? Sack everybody that works in it, replace it with a whole new generation of young white men, and then we should have BBC America and BBC Canada and BBC Australia and BBC New Zealand, and we should use the BBC to control our colonies, because we can control the news, we can control the media, and then we can keep the Anglosphere together, and we can work together as a team to continue to dominate the world. As I keep pointing out repeatedly, again and again and again, there are roughly 200 million English people in this world. The English race is the dominant white ethnicity in this world. And yet very foolish, low IQ, retarded people on the internet choose to celebrate Adolf Hitler instead. And they wish that they were German. And Jonathan Bowden himself came out and said, Germany is the heart of Europe. Well, excuse me, mate, Germany didn't conquer the world. The English did. The English master race conquered the world. So perhaps we should rally behind that. Pretty obvious, I know. But the ethno-nationalists don't get it because they're dumb. Some random people on Twitter get it, but nobody of any prominence is pushing this idea. Only me. But people don't watch my videos. What can I do, They don't watch my videos. So, but anyway, he points out England nurtured it. Yeah, so he says it's time to grow up. Fine. He says England protected America. He says that some people make the argument that England has protected America. Well, he says no. He says England has just drawn America into its wars. And again, this is the whole spirit of the American dream here. They just want to be left alone. They want American isolationism. They want America first. They don't want to get involved in wars. This is why a lot of Americans turn to neo-Nazism, because they see it like you're breaking the Monroe Doctrine. They see it as why are we getting involved in the wars in Europe? This is not these are not the principles on which this country was founded, and they have a point. Although I would argue they do have a duty to protect their fatherland, but you can see they have a point. You can see they make an argument here. You can see where it's coming from. Basically, the whole driving force behind this common sense pamphlet is that, well, America, we can just break free from England, and then we can just trade with Europe, and we can be friends with France, and we can be friends with Spain. We don't need England, and England's just getting us involved in these wars. And we don't want to be enemies of France, and we don't want to be enemies of Spain. It's a strong argument. And then he talks about Boston, and he talks about he basically just says we can't reconcile. We can't reconcile with these people. There's too much blood has been shed. We can't forget this. And also, even if we do reconcile with these people, then they'll just later on, 10 years down the road or 20 years down the road, they will once again, place taxes on us and so on and so forth, and try to control us once again. So we may as well just break free forever. And that's basically the sum and substance of the essay. It's a short essay. It's perfectly readable. He does go on to propose his idea of how government should work and be put together. That part is a little bit boring, but nonetheless, short and sweet, a very striking pamphlet. If only somebody would write something like this for the English, and we would rally behind this. An English ethno-nationalism, right? I'm trying. People aren't listening, but yeah, very short, very sweet, very influential. What time are we? 44 minutes. Yeah, and so I kind of went down like a bit of a rabbit hole, to be honest with you, looking into this. Did you guys know did you guys know about the Quakers? Do you guys know about the Quakers? Do you know about the Quaker angle? Because there is an argument to be made that the American Revolution is a Quaker revolution. Okay, so you can blame it on the Jews. You can blame it on the Irish you can blame it on the Jews because you can blame everything on the Jews, right? Let's be fair. You can blame it on the Irish because of the Boston Tea Party. You can blame it, obviously, on the Freemasons. Washington himself was a Freemason. Benjamin Franklin was a Freemason. You can blame it on the French, although I don't know if you can blame it on the French that much, because as far as I understand it, obviously they gave money to support it, but it had already started. But anyway, you can blame it on the Jews, you can blame it on the Masons, you can blame it on the Irish, you can blame it on the Freemasons, you can also blame it on the Quakers. The Quakers were hugely influential in early American society because the most powerful city in America was Philadelphia, and this was a Quaker city. It was established by William Penn, who was given the land by the King of England because the King of England owed some money to his father. So he gave him the whole of Pennsylvania, apparently, and so he established Philadelphia. The Constitution of America was written in Philadelphia. The first and second Congresses were brought together in Philadelphia, and Thomas Paine lived in Philadelphia. So Benjamin Franklin found Thomas Paine. I say found him. He met Thomas Paine in England, and he himself sent Thomas Paine to America and to Philadelphia, and he got a nice cushy job in some magazine or whatever in Philadelphia, and then he published the pamphlet. But I don't actually, to be honest, I've got to say I don't know that much about the Quakers, but Edward Dutton's written a book on the subject matter. I haven't read it yet. I will get round to reading it, but yeah, they're very liberal. Here I am, you see the slip? I use the term liberal. I can't help it. But they're very progressive. They're very left wing. Advocated against slavery. Advocated for women's rights. Advocated for multicultural. Advocated for all this stuff. Okay, very, very open. Very. They're actually famous for changing the English language because people used to say you used to be a polite way of saying you, and thou used to be the informal way of saying you. In Hindi, they say "ap" is the polite, and "tu" is the informal. You see, and so we used to have this two-tier system of saying "you" in our language, and it's been lost now. This is why you see "thou" being used a lot in Shakespeare, and it's like, ooh, it's Old English and it sounds mysterious. It's actually just an informal way of saying "you." The Quakers, because they were egalitarian, addressed everybody with thou, and they refused to use thou. They refused to use the you. They refused to say you, and I'm having a mental breakdown here. And so people became disgusted with using the word thou because it became associated with just being Quaker speech, and so everybody ended up just saying you to each other. It's kind of interesting. I mean, just go on another tangent. The whole please and thank you thing used to be an aristocratic thing, or it used to be, please used to be for your pleasure. It's something you used to say to a lord, and the lord to the person would say thank you. But the peasants wouldn't used to say this to each other. They were much more informal. It's another thing I saw in India, like, people don't say please and thank you. And it's taken to be very rude. And I do find it to be very rude. And I don't like it. But they're not trying to be rude. It's just not part of their culture to say please and thank you. Like, I know it sounds crazy, but I don't know. Different culture, different civilization. Anyway, so there's the Quaker angle, right? There's also the Mason angle, and I went down a whole rabbit hole with Benjamin Franklin, But Benjamin Franklin was a member of a group called the Hellfire Club. And the Hellfire Club was started by a guy called Francis Dashwood. And they used to meet in the West Wycombe, I don't even know how to pronounce this, Wycombe? The West Wycombe Caves, which they're known as the Hellfire Caves. You can go and visit them. They are a tourist site. The full name of the Hellfire Club was actually Order of the Friars of St. Francis of Wycombe. So there you go. And they used to meet in these caves, and they used to engage in black mass. So, typical old school Satanism, essentially. Read the Bible, but turn it on its head. So Satan is the hero. So, turn the cross upside down. And I mean, I don't know. The thing is, nobody actually knows what went on in the Hellfire Club. It could have just been some Brits, and they go into a cave, and they drink a lot of wine and have sex with some prostitutes and fool around. Or it could have been something a lot darker. I mean, we just really don't know. But, interestingly enough, the motto for the Hellfire Club was, "Do what thou will." Which is fascinating because, of course, this is the motto which is later picked up by the beast himself, the most evil man in England, Aleister Crowley, right? And some people say that the phrase went on to be picked up by the hippie movement in that it became, do whatever you want, right? Aleister Crowley was, of course, kind of a hero to the hippie movement, or at least he's on the front cover of the Sgt. Pepper album. You got to fold the album in a certain way, and then he's on the head of it, and he's, ruling over everybody else, and etc., etc. So, and this phrase itself comes, the phrase "do what thou will" comes from something called the Abbey of Thelma. And the word itself, Thelma, means desire in Greek. Strong desire, strong appetite. Of course, Crowley himself established a religion called Thelma. This was his cult, his religion. He wanted to become a religion. So they got inspiration, the Hellfire Club got inspiration from a French humanist in the French Renaissance. His name is Francois Rabelais, and he wrote a book which is very popular in its day called Gargantua and Pantagruel. It's about two giants, and they established the Abbey of Thelema as a reward to a monk, apparently, in this book. And it's a place of pleasure, and the men and the women, they go in, and there's a pond, and they drink, and they do whatever they want, and the motto is "do what thou will." So now you know. Now you know. That's kind of where it comes from. Very, very influential phrase. "Do what thou will. Do what thou will shall be the whole of the law," is, of course, how Crowley phrased it. It's a dream of paradise, right? Just sexual liberation. Kind of reminds me a little bit of the Marquis de Sade's 100 Days of Sodom, which I have not read. I've read Justine, which is horrible. I'm kind of curious. Isn't it interesting how these dark books do hold a certain curiosity? They have a certain draw, isn't it? It's like 100 Days of Sodom. You know it's bad. You know it's a book about torture and anal sex and women getting murdered and nasty, nasty stuff. You know somebody made a movie about it, and you're just like, oh, I just want to see, like, what's it about? I'm just curious. I just want to know, right? I mean, I guess that's just the way the human mind is, I suppose. That's why people watch horror movies, I suppose. But there you go. So the point I'm trying to make is there a Masonic connection to Thomas Paine? Obviously, I'm very enthusiastic to blame the entire American Revolution on the Freemasons. Well, Benjamin Franklin is the guy that brought Thomas Paine to America, set him up with the job. Maybe he's the guy that got his pamphlet delivered everywhere, right? Who knows, right? I mean, this is the thing. Was the pamphlet popular just because it was popular? Or was it popular because it was promoted by the Freemasons? I don't know. Probably a combination of the two. Thomas Paine himself was not a Mason, but he did lead an interesting life, though. He obviously was engaged in the Revolution in America. He returned to England for some time. He got involved. I don't have enough time to talk about this, but it is a subject that's dear to my heart. He got involved in this war of the pamphlets. Essentially, oh my God, Essentially, Edmund Burke wrote Reflections on the Revolution in France, and it sparked a whole bunch of responses to this. And Thomas Paine was one of the people that responded. He responded with a book called The Rights of Man, and that's one of his most famous books. I'll be covering it soon. Obviously, Mary Wollstonecraft responds with Vindication of the Rights of Women. And obviously her husband William Goodwin, responded with, I forget what his book was called, but an inquiry concerning social justice, an inquiry concerning political justice. Yes, kind of considered to be a sort of proto-anarchist book, or it's said to be a philosophical anarchist book. I'm not really sure what that means. I mean, anarchism itself started with Proudhon later on, a French guy, or was he German? I forget. But whatever the case, interesting book. And then, of course, Thomas Malthus writes Principles of Population, kind of partly in a response to William Godwin. Because just pointing out that his ideas that, the rational mind can overcome everything and we can live in this utopia, it's all a little bit silly and a little bit stupid, because sexual desire is too strong and people are going to have children and there's not enough food to feed all of the children. So Malthus, my hero, right, greatest English philosopher, Thomas Malthus, is the antidote for socialism right from the beginning. Because the father of English socialism is Robert Owen, who, popularized the term socialism. He tried to create socialist communities. So people would go there, they would own no property. They'd just be part of some commune. They didn't work. People are still trying these days. That they still say this. They say, let's get together, we'll buy some land, and we'll just live on the land together and share everything. It never works. They always disagree with each other in the end. But he did do something good. He developed the co-op, which is probably the most successful expression of socialism in the history of socialism. So, well done for that, Robert Owen. But nonetheless, Robert Owen was inspired by William Godwin, and the true response to William Godwin is Thomas Malthus, Principles of Population. Like, guys, there's not enough food. The resources are limited. Okay, the socialists just do not seem to understand the concept that the resources are limited. They have a fantasy of a post-scarcity world, which is why the ultimate expression of socialism is Ian Banks, the science fiction author who created the Culture series. And what happens in the Culture series? Humanity lives in space, and they develop artificial intelligence, and the artificial intelligence looks after everything, and they have fully automated gay space communism. It's a fantasy, it's a dream, it doesn't work, it's not real, it's a dream, it's a fantasy, it's utopian. So it's Thomas More Utopia. It's Francis Bacon New Atlantis. It's the same old dream. It's oh my God, yeah. So there you go. Interesting. So that's basically all I have to say. Thomas Paine goes on to, he writes The Rights of Man, gets involved in this disagreement with Edmund Burke, gets kicked out of England, stays in France for a bit. In France, he becomes even more radical. He rejects Christianity. One point which I failed to make is that in Common Sense, he does use religious arguments to defend the idea that the monarchy is anti-Christian. And he points out the prophet Samuel. And the Israelites, they ask Samuel for a king. They want to copy the heathens. Of course, the heathens, they have kings, right? They want to copy the heathens. They want a king. Samuel, the prophet, says no. And he says, God says no. Right? Yahweh says no. We don't want to have a king. But they demanded one anyway. And so they got Saul. And then they got David. And then they got Solomon, and so on and so forth. So it's interesting. Both read Bible day and night. One reads black and one reads white. Interesting that Hobbes uses the Bible to say, well, we need a tyranny. The Bible both Hobbes and Robert Filmer use the Bible to justify the king and the tyrant. And yet here we have Thomas Paine using the Bible to justify democracy. Saying essentially we should have the rule of judges. Well, he doesn't mention the rule of judges, but I do find it interesting that we do live under the rule of judges. And obviously the word judge itself is a biblical word. And William the Conqueror came over. William the Conqueror was paid by Venice. He's married to a Jew. He brought the Jews over. And they established judges. And we're still living under these judges today. Just saying. Right? Just saying. The concept of the judge is very much a biblical idea and is very much an anti-monarchy idea, really, because if you've got judges, they're undermining the judgment of the king in a way. So anyway, interesting points. But the point I was trying to make is that when Thomas Paine goes to France, he gets involved in the French Revolution. He becomes much more atheistic. He turns against God, denounces Christianity. He also proposes, he's not the first to do this. I looked this up. Actually, the Romans had inheritance tax for aristocrats and for landowners. So he's not the first. But he is the first to propose an inheritance tax, which, the money which could be used for the redistribution of wealth, so to speak. Right? So that's not good, Thomas Paine. So he kind of gets his head screwed up in France, and he comes back to America, and he's kind of disowned. People don't like him. They don't want to talk to him. And then he dies. And the Christians like to say on his deathbed, he recants, and he says that he does believe in God. But who knows if that's true, or it's just Christian propaganda. I mean, whatever the case, he's an argumentative guy, likes to get in fights with everybody. Before he came to America, he divorced his wife. He might have even had 2 wives, I'm not sure. But this is not an agreeable person, a combative person, a natural-born revolutionary, changed the world. And common sense it's the pamphlet that changed the world. It's the pamphlet that changed America. It's the pamphlet that convinced the American people to turn against the homeland and to say that, no, we shall not have reconciliation. We shall break free. We shall form our own nation. So a very interesting read. And there you go, guys. Thank you very much for listening. And goodbye.